The sun over Dry Willow Ridge bled red against the evening clouds, as rancher Eli Thompson rode into town with a dust-torn coat, a stare colder than a January river, and a silence that pressed against people's chests like a heavy hand. Folks had always known Eli as a quiet, dependable figure, the kind who fixed fences for widows without charging a coin and fed stray dogs even in drought years, but ever since his younger brother Jonah disappeared 6 months ago, Eli had changed into a man carved from bitterness and purpose. He talked less, slept less, listened more, to whispers, to rumors, to secrets, and when he stepped into the Lucky Lantern saloon that evening, the entire room froze because everyone could feel he wasn't there for a drink. He was there for truth, and truth in such towns always came with danger tied to its boots. At the back table sat 3 men who had something to do with Jonah's disappearance. Everyone knew, but no one dared say. Cole Tanner, the mean-eyed cattle broker with a grin that made even criminals uneasy, Rudd Avery, a drifter with fists like rocks, and Marshal Darius Hale, the lawman himself, leaning back, swirling a glass of whiskey as though every ugly deed in town were a card in his pocket. Eli approached their table slowly, boots echoing like clock ticks in a funeral hall. "Evenin'," he said, voice rough as gravel. Cole smirked. "What brings the righteous rancher around? Lose a cow? Need a drink?" But Eli ignored him and stared right into the marshal's eyes, those cold gray eyes that pretended to hold justice, but hid secrets beneath them. "I know what happened to Jonah," Eli said. The room sucked in a breath. The piano player stopped mid-note. Someone dropped a glass. Marshal Hale leaned forward, voice quieter than a rattlesnake's breath. "Eli, please, don't do that." His tone wasn't pleading, it was warning, the kind that meant the next step could cost a man everything. But Eli kept talking. He found out about the land scheme, how you 3 were stealing folks' property through fake liens, how you used him to run messages, until he learned too much. Rudd Avery stood abruptly, chair screeching like a scream. "You better mind your tongue." But Eli didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. The whole town seemed to hold its breath as the rancher reached into his coat. Nobody knew if he carried a gun or a letter or a ghost from his past. Marshal Hale stood, hand on his holster. "Eli, I'm telling you, don't do this." And then it happened, the moment that shook Dry Willow Ridge forever. Eli slowly pulled out a worn leather notebook with Jonah's name carved on the front. Inside were dates, names, proof, and drawings of hidden drop sites, evidence. Enough to topple men, enough to burn a town from the inside out. Eli slammed it on the table so hard the lantern flames flickered. "Jonah gave me this the night he vanished." Gasps broke through the saloon like cracks in ice. Suddenly, everything happened at once. Rudd lunged. Cole reached for his knife. The marshal drew his gun. But Eli moved faster than any rancher ever should have. He kicked the table, knocking Hale's arm off aim, grabbed Rudd's wrist mid-swing, twisted, and slammed him into Cole. The chaos roared loud enough to shake the saloon doors. Chairs flew, bottles shattered, and people ducked. Someone yelled for help. Someone else ran outside to ring the town bell. And Eli, breathing hard, eyes burning with a fire that wasn't anger but justice, shouted to every soul in the room, "You will all hear the truth." That was the moment the town realized. Eli Thompson wasn't just mourning. He wasn't just angry. He was about to bring down the men who controlled Dry Willow Ridge, even if it meant the whole town burned with him. Night swallowed Dry Willow Ridge in a cloak of moonless black as the entire town spilled into the dusty Main Street, drawn by the ringing bell and the erupting shouts from the saloon. Eli stood in the center, bruised, dusty, but unbroken, gripping Jonah's notebook like a holy book in a sinner's courtroom. Marshal Hale staggered out behind him, gun still half drawn, anger twisting his face. "Eli Thompson," he growled, "you're under arrest for assault, disruption of peace, and threatening an officer of the law." But the townsfolk, finally brave enough to gather near, didn't move aside for the marshal. They watched, waited. Something in Eli had awakened something in them, too. Eli raised the notebook high. "Jonah didn't just disappear," he shouted. "He was taken, and I know where they hid him." A murmur rose through the crowd, fear mixing with hope. For months they'd whispered of strange activity near the old mine shaft beneath the ridge. Lights at night, wagons moving silently, shadows that didn't belong to animals. Eli gestured toward the ridge, voice steady as steel. They buried the truth under that hill. Marshal Hale stepped forward, gun aimed. "Please," he said again, quieter this time, almost desperate. "Don't do that." Eli met his stare, unblinking. "You took my brother. I'm taking back this town." And with that, Eli turned and started walking toward the ridge. He knew he might not return. He knew the men behind him would try to stop him. But he also knew Dry Willow Ridge needed someone to break the chain of fear curled around its throat. One by one, people began following him. Old Mrs. Dawkins with her cane, the blacksmith with arms thick as tree trunks, the barber who heard every rumor, the preacher who'd lost his land, mothers holding lanterns, teenagers gripping rocks, a whole town, rising. Hale shouted for them to stop, but no one listened. Cole and Rudd rode out to cut Eli off, guns ready, but the blacksmith tackled Rudd clean off his horse, and Cole was yanked down by 3 fed-up ranch hands. The power Hale had relied on, fear, was slipping like sand through his fingers. At the entrance of the abandoned mine shaft, Eli held up Jonah's notebook, flipping to the last page, a shaky drawing Jonah had made the night before he disappeared. A door inside the mine, marked with intent. Eli lit a lantern, took a breath deep enough to break a man's ribs, and stepped inside. The townsfolk waited outside, holding the dark at bay. Inside the shaft, the air was thick with dust, silence, and ghosts. Eli reached the wooden door, forced it open, and froze. Inside was a room filled with crates of forged documents, stolen deeds, stacks of money, and ledgers naming every victim. But the real shock came in the corner. Jonah's coat, blood-stained but preserved, hung like a memory that refused to die. Eli swallowed hard. He whispered, "I'll finish what you started, little brother." Behind him, footsteps echoed. Marshal Hale, gun drawn, voice trembling. "You should have left the past buried." Eli turned slowly. "You buried people's homes, their hope, my brother. But you forgot something important. Buried things don't stay buried forever." Hale cocked his gun. Then the whole town stormed inside behind Eli, filling the cavern with lantern light and justice. Hale didn't stand a chance. What followed became legend, the night an entire town stood behind one grieving rancher to reclaim everything stolen from them. Hale and his men were arrested, their criminal operation exposed to the last rotten detail. Property was returned, lives were rebuilt, and as Eli walked out of that mine with Jonah's notebook over his heart, people didn't cheer. They cried, because truth had finally come home. Weeks later, as Dry Willow Ridge healed, folks would say, the town wasn't saved by a hero, it was saved by a brother who refused to stay silent. And in every tavern, in every whisper, in every fireside story, one moment lived forever. Marshal Hale saying, "Please, don't do that," and the rancher doing it anyway.